This is Sophie from Awaken with Sophie, where we take a modern spin on healing old wounds and getting you into the best version of yourself. Today, we're going to be talking about taking the journey from 3D to 5D and what that all means. So here we go. I'm very excited to talk to you guys all about the journey from 3D to 5D. This concept, is similar to a lot of the things that you will probably have learned or seen. And as I'm talking, you'll probably be like, oh, I've been there. Oh, I get that. Oh, I get that too. Because right now our planet is really in a place of hopping from 3D to 5D, 3D to 5D, 3D to 5D. And it is up to us as awakening beings to learn to stabilize our frequency. And that's part of why we are doing all this healing work, is to get the frequency out of the way that's clogging your ability to raise your vibration and hold a higher frequency, not only for yourself, but for the planet. So as you start to hold a higher frequency, positive emotion, positive frequency is hundreds of times more powerful than negative frequency. But you have shame as like the lowest vibrating frequency. And we've all experienced that on this planet. We all have experienced the deep down, I feel like I'm bad. That, let's call it a 10. And then you have at the top of the low scale, you have anger. So anger is a much higher frequency of emotion. But then when you go into like the, let's call those the red emotions, you go into yellow, you get to courage. Courage is part of like the bridge that takes us out of the lower frequencies and moves us up. But then the top high frequencies are love, joy, and peace. And then the highest is enlightenment, which is like vibrating at 1,000, let's say. So love, joy, and peace are around like 500. And so you could have somebody in a room that's in shame, that's vibrating at 10, and somebody walk in that is able to hold the space of peace at 500, and they're going to override the frequency in the room. Most people think it's backwards. Most people think they're bringing me down. But the truth is the higher frequencies will actually lift it all. It's what happens in those situations if you get brought down is that your lower frequencies are kind of pulling you out of your higher frequencies, but it's you. Because if those lower frequencies aren't there, you're able to stabilize and lift a higher space, hold a higher space. So the whole idea of becoming aware of 3D, 4D, and 5D is just to give you a really quick awareness on this kind of concept of like, what frequency am I really holding inside of me? So basically 3D is where most of our planet is living. 3D and 4D, we hop a lot between those, most people. So 3D is just the zone that is like what I can see and touch is what's real. It's the free will zone. So part of free will is that we were able to explore without God. That's what free will is. But we always have the God choice. Now I'm using God as the terminology for this, but you can insert divinity, source, creator, life force, whatever you want, universe, as whatever resonates with your heart. But for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to be using God. So in 3D, we have the consciousness of a brief God choice, which basically means that all of a sudden we'll like remember, oh, I can tap into God, but it's brief. Or a metaphor of a 3D zone is we think of a child, and this child goes outside and finds a puddle and plays around in the puddle after this big rainstorm and jumps in it and gets muddy and wet. And then he comes in and he's soaking wet, but he comes back to his parent. And his parent then takes his clothes off, washes the clothes, puts new clothes on him, and all is well. That's kind of the example of 3D. We come down to earth, we play a little bit, we get a little dirty, we get a little scared, and then we're like, is there something here to help me? And then God comes into our life briefly and helps us clean it up. That's 3D zone. A lot of people are living there. There are certain things that can keep us locked in it, and there's certain things that can help us move out of it. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. Three of the biggest things that keep you locked in 3D are whining, complaining, and blame. So these three tendencies, emotions, or patterns, whatever you want to call them, validate your pain and promote victimhood. That keeps you straight locked in to that third dimensional consciousness. So if we want to start lifting out of that, we have to start becoming aware. So you become an observer, not a judger. Judgment is another frequency that is very 3D, but observation is the ability to notice without judging. So part of coming out of that locked space from 3D is to become an observer. Another thing that keeps you locked in 3D is bitterness. So bitterness basically is evaluating the situation or circumstance to justify the anger in your heart. Whoa. So that's why we're doing all this work, to heal and cleanse and clear, to get the complaining and the whining and the blaming and the judgment and the anger out of our being. So there's new space, and we're bringing in the light into the being, so that the being then has this new space, which I call your placeholder. You have new placeholders inside, you're going to raise your vibration, you're going to increase your frequency, you're going to be able to help the planet or your space on the planet. I believe the planet as a whole as well. But these things are really important to become aware of and become the observer on, not without judgment when you notice you're doing it, but just the observer. So then if you want to move out of 3D, what you do is, like, let's say we just realized we were bitter. So we realized we were dwelling in a certain state inside, and we were projecting it out through language, through thoughts, through conversation. But we're not really dealing with it. We're just exasperating the frequency. So to move out of 3D, we got to stop doing that. And one really cool tip is this. If you have a rough day or a weird story or something crazy happens, only tell your story 3 times. That's it. And then don't tell it anymore. So this will put a limit on how much you can share that energy. And then you stop sharing that energy. And so now you need to do something different. And this is what starts to take you out of 3D, which I thought was a really cool place. So once we stop telling our stories, it's going to redirect us back to our heart. Now we start to come into 4D. Okay, so 4D is beginning to understand that there's something greater than what we can explain, see, touch, or feel. And that's why this planet Earth has so much 3D, 4D, because a lot of people with our religious background and just on this planet have a connection to something greater than themselves. They will acknowledge that. How they practice and what they do with it is not important. It's just the concept that they believe that there's something beyond what they can see, touch, and feel. That is the concept of 4D. So while 3D is a brief God choice, 4D is a temporary God choice. So the temporary God choice basically says, I am aware there's a God, and I might even have a practice, but then I let go of it and I come back probably to some patterns in 3D and get stuck there. So it's not a stable frequency. It's like turning the water on and off. You use it when you need it. While 3D is maybe just turning the water on really quick and off really quick. So one of the things that happens in 4D, which I find very interesting, is fear comes up. So part of going into 5D is learning to go from head experience to heart experience. And as we go on that journey of opening the heart, all this fear arises. And fear ultimately is there as a messenger. So fear is a feeling in the emotional body that's there to actually create change. That's its purpose. is I am here to create change. The second that you create the change, the fear will actually dissipate. Fear drives us into action. It drives us into one of those responses. However, our triggers or our stressors now, as you probably heard me say, come from so many mundane things. It can come from a text message or an email or a memory while you're driving to your next appointment. And then we have these fight or flight that gets triggered, and we get stuck in the fear because we're not driven to action. And that's why the fear can feel so overwhelming. So the biggest way to deal with the 4D state, which I kind of call the flyover state, and a lot of people will talk about how you really go from like 3D to 5D and gloss over 4D. But it's really understanding that fear will come up in this space, but fear is a messenger. So here is how I love to deal with fear, is treat it like it is like a friend. Okay, fear, I hear you. What is your message? And then listen and see what really can come through. Journaling, I would really encourage that pen to paper space when you're talking to your fear, because it is so primal that if you can be working on that like old school system of handwriting, it's like you're more in tune with actually addressing the fear. So again, I can feel you, fear. What is your message? And then explore. So once you find the message, the fear should dissipate. And then we start to move into 5D. So I love this quote. When you open your mind, you become creative. When you open your heart, you become compassionate. When the heart and mind are synchronized, they open the portal to 5D. Boom. All right, let's go, guys. So 5D is your higher self version in this body timeline consciousness. So 5D is all about the engaged heart. It's about the heart being open and being able to flow and flood information, consciousness, and experience through this portal, through the heart. So if you have had heart issues, if your heart chakra tends to be a little blocked, that's going to be your work, is really surrendering and opening and healing the heart so that you can stabilize your frequency in 5D. Now, 5D is the permanent God choice. 3D was the brief, 4D is the temporary, 5D is the permanent. So this is where we are never separate from the divine. The divine is in everything we do, every thought we have, every experience we go into, the divine is there. And what starts to happen here is that we start to have this understanding that this body is not who we really are. We are a spirit. The body is living in our spirit, not the spirit's in our body. So it's like this consciousness of your spiritual information expanding so much that it manifested a body. And the spiritual field is larger than the physical field. So in 3D, we basically think about history to help us understand the world and what our future will be. But in 5D, we think about the possibility. It's all possibility based. So there is a shift outside of the historical perspective and into the possibility perspective. This is a huge part of 5D, five-dimensional consciousness. We also in this space understand the difference between the ego and the soul, and really create the space for the soul to speak, the soul to be involved in everything we're doing. We don't identify with the ego, so the ego doesn't really have as much space. You're still an earthly being, so you might enjoy earthly things, but it doesn't feed the way that the soul is fed through the way that you live. 5D is all about this collective awareness. So it's an expansive awareness of oneness. And what I like to think about is like that, a hydrangea. You know, if you have a hydrangea, which is like this big puffy flower, if you get really close to it, you see that it's just little stems of teeny little flowers, all next to each other. And they all come from the same source, and they're all next to each other, but they're one big flower made up of teeny, teeny parts. And that is a representation of our oneness. We're all coming from the same place. We're all flowers. But together we create this bigger flower. When you start to understand this collective awareness, it starts to shift some of maybe your former triggers. So if I do something to somebody else, it impacts the whole. So we start becoming very aware of our decisions in traffic, at the grocery store, in relationships, that every choice we make affects the collective. And at first, when you start getting used to 5D, you're in that observance mode still. So you can see things that you do that drop you back down. So when we talk about the zigzag of 3D to 5D, at first, that's kind of what it feels like, because you're in an observance mode and you see the things that sink you. And so then you can change them. And the goal is to learn to stabilize at a higher frequency more and more and more. So when you're in this frequency and stabilizing, your heart is what leads it. Your heart is what leads you. So you can also hear the guidance of your heart, which comes as whispers or nudges, but your higher self will start to speak to you through your heart. So like one thing that happens to me, and I'm in the midst of really understanding this symbol from spirit, but I've started to get these like butterfly petal feelings in my heart. It almost feels like my heart's skipping a beat, but I know I know it's spirit. So I don't like run to the doctor or anything, but I have these like wings that flutter in my heart when something was said. And this started happening probably a month ago. And so now I'm in the process of observing when I feel that, what was that, and opening back up to spirit, like it just happened right now. It's happening. And so that's like spirit's channel trying to communicate, like Morse code almost, through my heart. And so stay tuned. In 6 months, I'll probably be able to tell you exactly what that means. But currently, that's a way that spirit's working with my heart through these flutters to help me understand a certain symbol. Like every time I feel that, I remember 5D. I remember 5D consciousness. So if I have sunken into any lower vibration, it's like a signal right in that moment at this point to rise back up, to get into collective consciousness, to come out of the head and into the heart and rise and hold this space of oneness, rather than judgment, insecurity, lack, doubt, shame, all the crap that, we tend to pick up as humans. This also is the space where we can see the beauty in everything. So a really big, important part of 5D is that you see that everything that happens is actually happening for your healing. So all those difficult, dark, challenging conversations, situations, traumas that have happened or are happening are here to grow you into a higher version of you. And that is a huge shift. This is probably the very beginning shift of going into 5D consciousness, is starting to look at the world in that way. So you stop saying, why is this happening? And you start saying, this is interesting. I wonder how this is going to be used for my growth. And you approach every concept and every experience from that perspective, keeping the heart open and responding to life in that way. There's also a ton of gratitude that begins to come from the heart for what is. Not wishing it was different, not wishing it could be now or later, but for what is, and finding that true, authentic gratitude in the moment. These are some of the concepts of 5D. Now, once we really get into 5D, it's kind of like all systems are in alignment. The gut, the heart, the mind have this way to communicate with each other. And as you work with spirit and you work with your, whatever your spiritual gift is, you're going to start to get these symbols that show you that synchronicity and show you that alignment. Another beautiful thing that I love in this space is your competitors become your ally. So when you want something, you pray for the whole. When you see somebody get something that you want, you celebrate because you know if they can have it, so can you. You see the fullness of manifestation in everyone and everything. There's a celebration for others. And you have a deep level of concern for your fellow humans. It's this concept of shared economy, that what is good for me is good for the whole, and what's good for them is good for me. Now, this is, I think, such a beautiful teaching. It's something that I work on, and I find such a comfort in the practice of that. But it's so beautiful, and it's so soft, and it's so provides this space for people to achieve and be and grow in your presence and have your support. Now, going back into the 5D as the God choice, just going into a little bit more depth around that, understanding that in 5D, we don't need free will. Free will kind of like dissipates because you become so in alignment with the divine that it's like this spiritual maturity happens. And in that, you don't need the 10 commandments because you would never act out of integrity. You would never lie or kill or steal or cheat. You know, and it reminds me of this moment I had. I got put on, there's this one girl, I've taken one of her courses, and somehow I got put on the list for one of her other courses, and I was getting all the coursework sent to me weekly with this password, and I thought it was just a mess up like the first time. But after like the third week of it, and I was seeing this email come through and I never did anything with it, I reached out to her admin people and I was like, I don't know what this is, but I know I didn't sign up for this, and I have a feeling this is her content and I'm not going to access it without paying for it. And I didn't pay for it. So I just want you guys to take me off the list if that's the case. And they wrote back and said, oh my gosh, thank you so much for honoring our space. And, you know, I don't know how you got on that list, but, you know, thank you. And I just felt like so good about that exchange, because I felt like it was an integrity choice to not explore it at all. It was, if I had explored it, it would have been spiritual trespassing, in my opinion. So to just kind of stand on the outside and then communicate it felt so good to me to be able to be in that type of exchange of my own integrity, you know, and making sure that I'm doing, when no one else is looking or no one else knows, I'm doing what's true and right for me. So living in full integrity is such a good feeling. And it's something that I work on. I mean, I'm not perfect and I don't claim that, but I have noticed that when I get in alignment with that true integrity, which you do when no one is looking, is so fulfilling. It's such great, you know, satisfying feeling inside. To talk a little bit about how we move into 5D. From, let's say that we're like really working on all this work and we're working on ascension and we're working on holding a higher space. What are some like realistic steps that we can take to really acknowledge and then have like almost kind of like a logical process, which I love having that. I feel like it makes things easier in the heat of emotion. So I'm going to go through a 5-step process. Step 1. You have a huge shift in perception that everything happens to you for your healing. You begin to see all your emotions being released as a way that you can heal. Every situation, circumstance becomes a way that you see your inner being trying to exfoliate to create space for your higher purpose to come in. That is so imperative. That is like the bridge that kind of goes over the ocean of 4D and goes to this beautiful island of 5D. It's happening for me, not to me. Step 2, we transform worry thoughts. So this again means we need to be in the space of observance. Observance. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. And we begin to notice that all our thoughts that go on and on and on and on about worry of the future, worry of what they're thinking, worry about a past situation, worry about an interaction that just happened. You start to notice these while they're occurring. And you silence them. And you make a different choice. You shift your thinking back into the space of 5D, which is away from what if or why, and into wonder. I wonder what's going on here. I wonder how I'm going to grow through this. So we replace why with wonder, and we open to surprises. So you move out of feeling that space of like victim, and you move into the adventure. So 5D is about adventure. 3D is really about, there's just a lot more victimhood. I'm not going to say it's about victimhood, but there's a lot more tendency to be like it happened to me, not for me. Step 3, we lead from our open heart. So we do a lot of the work to open the heart and make sure that that is where our dominant intention and force is coming from. So this is a big concept. If we have closed heart issues, or you have things, situations, or people in your heart that shut your heart down, it's important to work through those, not just remove yourself from them, but to work through them and figure out what your heart is shutting down for, what it's trying to protect, what the hurts are. And then you go behind the scenes and you deal with those. And the goal would be, can I keep my heart open in the presence of that pain? Because then we're really leading from the heart. So I think the common thing is, I don't like you, I don't like that situation, I'm going to stay away from it, which is great in the beginning. But in 5D, it's the willingness to say, I need to have my heart open no matter what. So if it closes, it's my responsibility to see what is behind the surge that closed those doors, and know that it's happening for you, not to you, so that you can heal. Step 4 is entering the collective consciousness, which we talked about briefly. So to live in the heart, you truly know and experience all that's here right now. You're not necessarily in the past, in the future. Now, if you do any astral travel work, or you do any timeline hopping, I'm hoping you have a very good grounding practice in the midst of that, but understanding that now is where divinity is. And connecting to that now helps you enter the collective consciousness. Now, being in the collective consciousness of oneness does not mean you don't have boundaries. It does not mean that you say yes to everything. In fact, it means that you know yourself so well and know how you are affecting the collective. So it means you may need more boundaries. It may mean that you need to really know thyself, so you know where your energy is going to be used the best. To say yes to something that really feels like a no is going to shut your heart down. So what are we really doing there? And it means being willing to stand for that. And people may not like that at first. You might get hit with some turbulence, which I am fully aware of and in the midst of. So it's no joke. You start to shift and change some old frequencies. People around you, the people closest to you, might not like it, because they can't do the same things that they've always done in your presence. So it requires shifting, changing, growing, dealing, facing. This is not a perfect path. There is no such thing as perfection on this path. No one walking this path is perfect. It is not about that. It's about showing up with your truth. Your truth, not the truth, your truth. So that is a big shift that keeps us in 5D. Is we don't say, well, the truth is. We say, my truth is, which allows the space for me to share with you what I have found, but also allows you the space to share the truth of what you've found. And when we're both in our truths together, we are one. Namaste. So in this collective consciousness, we also let go of separating thoughts. So the thoughts that separate us and divide us. You know, if one of your friends gets something you want and you're mad or you're sad or jealous or whatever it might be, that's a separating thought. And we want to work through that, whatever that is. We don't want to just like place a Band-Aid and be like, I'm so happy for you. When you're not, it's not authentic. The authentic thing would be like, holy crap, this is triggering stuff in me. Let me go through processing that and get to a place where I can celebrate them having what I would love to have too. And if I can get there, I'm in that celebratory oneness space and I'm affecting the collective. I'm holding a higher frequency for the collective. If we do our part to be clean and cleared and high vibrational on the inside, we can really hold the space for the collective and change it. So, collective consciousness, beautiful thing. Step 5 is a heart-led life. So what you want to notice is what you're choosing moment to moment. And in this heart-led space, you do more than what's expected of you. You show up more. Maybe it's a small thing, but it's also a huge thing. And I think that doing more than what's expected of you does not come from the ego, and it doesn't come from effort. It comes from the heart being open. And like just this presence of like, I'm here. I'm not in the past. I'm not in the future. I'm here. How can I serve? And that is like heart medicine to the soul when we show up for each other like that. Also, when we live a heart-led life, we learn to use both emotions and our mind to evolve together. So it's like you don't get mad at the emotions or the thoughts. They start to work as a unified system. And when this happens, that's when we can get that, like all systems in alignment. Okay, we're ready for takeoff. Let's go, 5D. Woo, stabilized. And then just a couple tips in staying in this heart-led space are, I just love this prayer request. And that is, God, show me how much I'm loved today. Oh, I just feel like that's such medicine. God, show me how my life can be an example of peace on earth. Show me, guide me, lead me. Now, the answer to that prayer might be showing me all the little chaotic stuff I have in my system that I got to clear before I can get there. But if I look at it as all healing to make space for this new light to come through, then I'll deal with that and I return to the prayer. God, show me how much I'm loved today. Show me how I can be a living example of peace on earth. And then another affirmation that I really love is, I am fully under the magnetics of higher dimensions. And I just love that idea of like ascended masters and higher frequencies holding magnets that we can lift to. It's like they're pulling us. So if we stay in that space of observance, even if we fall into 5D, our magnetic higher dimensional frequencies pull us back up. Yay. But this is a very important part. And I think that it's worth spending a little bit of time talking about. How do we explain 5D to those around us, maybe that aren't quite awakening at the rate you are, or aren't quite into the things you are into? How do we explain to them? And so I have a little bit of a tool you can work with. Don't be too quick to explain your spiritual awakening. And I just love this concept. Make somebody ask you twice. If they're interested in what you're going through, make them ask you twice. Because the first time is from the head. And if they're really interested, the second time will be from the heart. And if you're talking about 5D, their heart needs to be open. If it's not, you'll get hit with a ton of resistance and it'll drop you right back down to 3D or 2D. So you only really want to share this kind of spiritual advancing with people who can receive it. Because if they can't, they're gonna resist it. They're gonna show you all the history, which is 3D, on why this isn't possible. They're gonna show you all the suffering on the planet. They're gonna show you all the perspectives that keep you stuck instead of rising. And that can close the heart, and then you sink down to 3D too. And then we have so it's just a little protective measure on how you can really talk about this with other people. Make them ask you twice. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really interested to see why the universe brought us together. You can see all the different offerings that we have. We have free workshops. We have different types of retreats and trainings and private coaching that you can all see below. We also have our next spiritual life coaching certification, retreat, and online training come up. So make sure to check that out if you feel a calling to learn these kind of teachings. I really look forward to hearing from you and learning about your spiritual journey. So make sure to follow us on Instagram at Awaken with Sophie. And if you ever have any spiritual questions, you can DM me or you can tag your posts with the Awaken Guide. Until next time, keep turning those obstacles into opportunities. Namaste, my loves.